Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show built to get you informed fast. Today, we're jumping into the global automobile market. It's a fascinating world. We'll be looking at where things stand now, where they're headed, based on the latest research from cognitive market research. So, our mission, basically a journey across continents, across countries. We want to uncover where this huge market is right now, where it's going, and maybe most importantly, how fast. Okay, let's kick things off globally. The big picture. This market generated, get this, over $2.1 trillion in 2021. That's 2,171.93 billion to be exact. And it's estimated to hit 2,563.4 billion in 2025. Then looking further out, projected to reach incredible 3,570.74 billion by 2033. That works out to a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of 4.23%. Pretty solid.
It really is. And these massive numbers, they aren't just about size. They really tell a story about the future, where investment's going, how manufacturing might be shifting. It's kind of a roadmap. And as you listen, it's worth thinking about how this connects to you. Maybe you're a driver, a consumer, or maybe you just follow global trends. This industry touches a lot.
That's a great point. So with that huge global view, let's zoom in a bit, continent by continent. How about we start in North America? It's a really significant contributor. The region saw revenues near $400 billion in 2021. That's $395.291 billion. And it's expected to climb to over $660 billion by 2033. $660.587 billion, actually. That's a CAGR of 4.372%. So slightly above the global average.
Yeah, and North America is interesting because you see different speeds within it. You've got the United States, obviously the heavyweight. It was $266.426 billion in 2021. That's forecasted to hit $422.776 billion by 2033. So growing steadily, about 3.9% CAGR. Then Canada, smaller market, sure, around $76 billion in 2021, but it's growing faster. Expected to reach over $137 billion by 2033. That's a 5% CAGR, almost 5.017%.
Yeah, faster growth in Canada. But then Mexico, it was about $52.5 billion in 2021, $52.574 billion, projected to almost double, right? Over $100 billion by 2033, $100.409 billion. And the CAGR there is impressive, 5.545%. Okay, let's unpack this. Mexico's growth really stands out here, doesn't it? Especially within North America.
It really does. That 5.5% isn't just a blip. It points to, well, sustained growth potential. Could be multiple factors. Maybe a growing middle class, maybe increased manufacturing investment, proximity to the U.S., or even shifting supply chains playing a role. It's definitely one to watch.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, speaking of different patterns, let's shift gears to Europe. Europe presents maybe an even more complex picture. The overall market was big, over $523 billion in 2021, $523.435 billion. And it's set to grow to roughly $807 billion by 2033, $806.987 billion. But CAGR is 3.6667%. That's actually a bit slower than the global average we saw earlier.
Right, and that immediately makes you think about the mix within Europe. It's not uniform at all. You have the established giants like Germany, huge market, nearly $129 billion in 2021, $120.765 billion. But its growth is projected at 3.288%, more modest. Same with the UK and France. Their growth rates are below 3%. UK was $84.273 billion, growing at 2.9%. France, $63.336 billion, growing at just 2.2%.
So mature markets, perhaps?
Could be. Maybe dealing with saturation or, like you said, that costly transition to EVs. Italy is similar, around 2.45% growth from $42.398 billion. Russia, interestingly, is listed here at $28.79 billion in 2021, projected to $36.314 billion in 2033. That's only about 2% growth, the lowest here.
Okay, so some really slow growth in major economies.
But then you see others picking up the pace. Look at Spain. It's $38.211 billion, but it's growing at over 4.1%, 4.177% to be precise.
Yeah.
And Denmark. And then this Luxembourg, tiny market, $8.375 billion, barely growing at all, less than 1%, 0.816% CAGR.
Exactly, a real mixed bag. So what does this all mean for Europe's varied landscape, these stark contrasts?
It suggests, well, very different things are happening on the ground. Maybe policy-driven, like Denmark's EV push. Maybe investment, like Spain. But what really jumps out, and you touched on this, is the rest of Europe category. It was about $61 billion in 2021, $61.242 billion. But it's expected to more than double, hitting nearly $140 billion by 2033, $139.609 billion, the CAGR. an explosive 6.932%.
Wait, nearly 7%. In rest of Europe, that's the highest rate we've seen so far anywhere.
It is. It's higher than any specific country listed, higher than any region's average.
That's incredible. Makes you wonder what's driving that, what hidden growth engines are in that group.
Absolutely. Could be emerging EU economies, could be non-EU nations adopting tech quickly. It signals there's still a lot of dynamism, maybe just not in the biggest headline countries.
Okay, well, speaking of massive scale, let's transition to Asia Pacific. Here's where it gets really interesting for the global market, I think. The region's overall numbers are just huge. $901.35 billion in 2021, projected to hit nearly $1.6 trillion by 2033. That's $1,588.98 billion. And the CAGR, 4.831%. So not only the biggest market right now, but also the highest regional growth rate.
Yeah, Asia Pacific is definitely the powerhouse, and it's driven by, well, several key players. China, naturally, leads the way. Almost $368 billion in 2021, $367.781 billion, growing to nearly $669 billion by 2033, $668.96 billion. That's a strong 5.083% CAGR. Japan is large, too, $140.71 billion, but growing a bit slower, around 3.88%, projected to $190.678 billion. But look at India, posted nearly $148 billion in 2021. What about South Korea and Southeast Asia? South Korea, solid growth, around 3.68%, from $66.7 billion to $103.284 billion. Yeah. But Southeast Asia as a block, that's another hotspot. It reached roughly $74 billion in 2021, $73.911 billion, projected to hit $144.597 billion by 2033. And get this, the CAGR is 5.728%.
Wow, so that's actually the highest growth rate within the whole APAC region.
That's right. Within APAC, Southeast Asia shows the fastest projected compound growth.
The sheer volume and the speed of expansion in that part of the world is just staggering. Okay, let's move now to South America. This region seems to show a different pattern again. The figures show about $165 billion in 2021, $165.067 billion, projected to hit just under $225 billion by 2033, $224.957 billion. But the CAGR is 2.684%. That's the lowest regional KGR globally, isn't it?
It is, which suggests, different economic winds blowing compared to Asia Pacific, for example. Brazil's the biggest market there, over $72 billion, $72.134 billion in 2021. But its projected growth is more modest, around 2.2%, aiming for $93.357 billion. Within the region, though, Colombia catches the eye. It was nearly $23 billion, $22.779 billion in 2021. Projected to hit almost $36 billion, $35.993 billion by 2033. That's a 3.955% CAGR. So the strongest growth among the specific South American countries listed here.
Okay, so even within the slowest growing region globally, you still find pockets of strength like Colombia. What sort of factors might be contributing to that overall slower pace for South America, do you think?
Well, it could be a mix of things. Economic headwinds, maybe dependence on commodity prices, which can fluctuate. Infrastructure development might be at a different stage. Political stability can also, impact investment and consumer confidence. Colombia's strength might point to specific national policies, maybe attracting investment, or perhaps just a faster-growing middle class there relative to neighbors. Oh, and the rest of South America category here shows the slowest growth within the region, just 1.84%, from $16 billion to about $19.8 billion.
Right. Interesting dynamics.
Huh.
Okay, next up, let's turn to the Middle East. This region had revenues around $121.6 billion in 2021, $121.628 billion, and projected to reach over $182 billion by 2033, $182.108 billion. That's a CAGR of 3.488%, kind of middle of the pack globally.
Yeah, solid growth. If we look inside the region, Saudi Arabia is the largest listed market, over $50 billion, $50.354 billion in 2021, growing at about 3% to reach $71.75 billion. Turkey is next, around $22.8 billion, but growing a bit faster at just over 4%, 4.017%, heading towards $36.4 billion. But the standout, again looking at growth rate, is Qatar. Smaller base, sure, about $7 billion, $7.054 billion in 2021, but it's projected to hit nearly $13 billion, $12.93 billion by 2033. That's a CAGR of 5.256%.
Qatar at over 5.2%. That's quite notable for the region.
It is. Suggests strong economic activity, maybe diversification efforts paying off, rising consumer demand in some of those Gulf nations.
All right, let's conclude our regional tour with Africa, a continent always talked about for its potential. The market value here was about $65 billion in 2021, $65.158 billion, expected to grow to over $107 billion by 2033, $107.122 billion. That's a CAGR of 3.804%. Again, fairly solid.
Yes, and looking at the breakdown provided, South Africa is listed as the largest specific market, nearly $28 billion, $27.692 billion in 2021, projected to reach over $47 billion, $47.134 billion by 2033. And its growth rate is pretty good, 4.1802% CAGR. Nigeria is also significant, around $19 billion, $19.156 billion, but growing slower, about 2.7% towards $27.8 billion. And just like in Europe, that rest of Africa category is interesting. It was about $18.3 billion in 2021, projected to $32.1 billion. That's a growth rate of 4.38%.
So the rest of Africa segment is actually growing faster than both Nigeria and South Africa individually.
According to these numbers, yes.
Yeah.
It indicates there's significant growth happening across other emerging economies on the continent, even if individually smaller.
Wow. What a journey that was, right across the global automobile market. We've seen this substantial growth projected overall heading towards 2033. But the real story seems to be the variation. Huge differences in pace across regions and countries. You've got explosive growth in parts of Asia-Pacific that's surprising rest of Europe, then more moderate expansion in, say, South America or some of the big European countries. Each place tells its own story.
Absolutely. And if we connect these numbers back to the bigger picture, it's not just about selling more cars. It really suggests a dynamic shift. Where global economic focus is going, where investment is flowing, these trends hint at huge changes in innovation too, EVs, autonomous driving, all that. Plus evolving consumer demands, the need for new infrastructure. It really reshapes the economic landscape. It shows how adaptable the industry is and how central it is to global commerce.
Yeah, definitely. So given all these projections and the really varied growth rates we've just walked through, what about emerging factors, things maybe these numbers don't fully capture yet, like, say, breakthroughs in alternative fuels, or big shifts in city planning away from cars, or, unforeseen global economic shocks? Could those things totally reshape this picture by 2033? Maybe even speed things up or slow them down dramatically? What stands out to you as the biggest potential disruptor that could just flip these projections on their head? Something for you, the listener, to think about.